They told you it was the trial of the century. They told you it was about one man, a football hero turned actor, standing accused of the most brutal double murder in modern Los Angeles history. But what they didn't tell you, what they never wanted you to understand, is that this case was never just about blood on the gloves or DNA on the pavement. It was about power, perception, and the manipulation of truth itself. On June 12, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were found savagely murdered outside Nicole's Brentwood condo, throats slashed, bodies drenched in blood. The scene was carnage. Hours later, suspicion turned toward O.J. Simpson, America's beloved icon. The smiling face that had sold products, crossed racial boundaries, and made white America comfortable with the idea of a black superstar. But when police zeroed in, when the sirens came for him, the case instantly became more than murder. It became a theater of national psychology. The infamous white Bronco chase, broadcast to 95 million people, wasn't just a pursuit. It was ritual spectacle, a modern-day gladiator dragged into the public square. And what followed the courtroom drama? The televised trial became the most elaborate psychological manipulation in American crime history. The jury was never just 12 citizens. It was the entire country, divided by lines of race, class, and hidden agendas. O.J. Simpson's trial was not a search for justice. It was a carefully orchestrated ritual designed to expose the fractures in America and force the world to look into the mirror of its own corruption. Tonight, we begin that descent into forbidden history. Tonight, you will see how this trial became a war for control over truth itself. The night of the murders wasn't just violent, it was ritualistic. Nicole Brown Simpson's body lay crumpled at the foot of the stairs, nearly decapitated by a knife slash so savage it suggested fury beyond reason. Ron Goldman's corpse bore defensive wounds, the marks of a man who fought desperately for his life. Yet from the very first moment, police treated the scene not as an unspeakable human tragedy, but as a stage. Evidence was collected sloppily, photographs went missing, and timelines blurred. Within hours, O.J. Simpson became the focus, yet the deeper you look, the more you see the fingerprints of manipulation. The LAPD was already notorious for its corruption, racism, and brutality in the wake of Rodney King. They knew the world was watching. Planting doubt was as powerful as planting evidence, and the seeds of chaos were sown immediately. The infamous bloody glove, discovered by Detective Mark Foreman, became the trial's most haunting symbol. But who was Foreman? A man later exposed as a virulent racist, a man who had lied under oath, a man whose credibility was deliberately shredded before the jury's eyes. Was this incompetence? Or was it calculated sabotage, ensuring no verdict could ever unite the country? The prosecution claimed the DNA evidence was airtight. Blood trails from Simpson's Bronco to his mansion, to the socks in his bedroom, linked him to the murders with near certainty. But the defense turned that science into suspicion, painting it as a police conspiracy to frame a black man, an argument that resonated in a city still burning from systemic injustice. What you witnessed wasn't a trial in pursuit of truth. It was the transformation of murder into media warfare. Every night, every broadcast, the networks served the case not as journalism but as entertainment. The courtroom became an arena where lawyers were gladiators, jurors were pawns, and the American public was the true prisoner. And behind it all, sponsors and corporations feasted. O.J. Simpson, once their golden face, became their golden sacrifice. Ask yourself this: did the jury ever stand a chance of weighing evidence in silence? when the entire world was screaming in their ears. You must understand, the trial was never about to murder people. It was about bending reality until the public no longer knew what was real and what was theater. And in that confusion, the system revealed its darkest weapon: control through spectacle. The real descent began when the cameras entered the courtroom. For the first time in American history, a murder trial was transformed into live. Daily programming, soap opera, sporting event, political referendum, all in one. Every witness became a performer, every lawyer a character in a narrative shaped not just by evidence, but by public appetite. Judge Lance Ito presided, yet even his authority bent under the weight of media pressure. He wasn't merely a judge. He was a television host, managing the pacing of a show that millions consumed like daily scripture. The defense team, famously called the Dream Team, understood the rules of this new arena. Johnny Cochran, with unmatched charisma, reframed the trial into a referendum on racism in America. His words, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," weren't just closing arguments. They were hypnotic incantations, designed to override logic with rhythm, to implant doubt through repetition. This wasn't law. It was psychological warfare. Meanwhile, the prosecution faltered, drowning in the complexity of DNA evidence that was ahead of its time. Instead of clarity, they created fog. The more science they presented, the easier it became for the defense to twist it into a narrative of corruption, contamination, and lies. But here is the forbidden truth. This imbalance didn't happen by accident. The networks wanted drama, not justice. The system wanted distraction, not resolution. At the very moment the OJ trial dominated headlines, other scandals, wars, and corporate crimes quietly unfolded in the background, unnoticed. Public energy was siphoned into obsession with one man's guilt or innocence, while the machinery of power continued unchecked. And beneath it all lay the shadow of race. The jury, 9 black jurors, 2 white, 1 Hispanic, did not simply judge Simpson. They judged America itself. They were told they could not trust the police, and after Rodney King, how could they? They were told evidence was tainted, and after decades of cover-ups, why wouldn't it be? The verdict became inevitable long before deliberations began. What was really on trial was the American system of justice, and the system revealed its face, scarred, manipulative, and desperate to preserve control. Remember this: Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman were buried, but their silence was exploited as fuel for the greatest media ritual of modern time. The question is not whether O.J. Simpson was guilty. The question is who wanted you so consumed by this story that you didn't see what else they were hiding. When O.J. Simpson stood in that courtroom, he wasn't just a defendant, he was a symbol. To some, he was the embodiment of racial triumph, the black man who had crossed the invisible barriers of American celebrity and wealth. To others, he was a traitor, a man who had tried to escape his identity by assimilating into the world of white privilege. And to the system, he was something far more valuable, a lightning rod for division. The defense didn't merely argue his innocence. They weaponized his identity. Johnny Cochran's strategy was simple, but devastating: expose the LAPD as corrupt, racist, and willing to frame a man because of the color of his skin. He brought Detective Mark Foreman into the spotlight, forcing the jury to confront his history of racist slurs and perjury. By the time Cochran was finished, Foreman wasn't just a discredited copy, was the embodiment of a racist justice system. And in the minds of jurors, if the police could not be trusted, then nothing else the prosecution presented mattered. Meanwhile, the prosecution's star evidence, The DNA was buried under suspicion. Even though the technology was revolutionary, the defense hammered the idea of contamination and incompetence, repeating it until it became truth. Remember, the day the verdict was read, October 3rd, 1995, America held its breath. Offices paused work, classrooms wheeled in televisions, entire cities froze as if awaiting the outcome of a war. When the words "not guilty" were spoken, a roar went up in some communities, tears of rage fell in others, and the divide became permanent. The trial of O.J. Simpson had ended, but the true trial, the trial of America's soul, had just begun. The reactions revealed everything the system wanted: division, chaos, distraction. White America saw a guilty man walk free. Black America saw a symbol of victory over centuries of racial oppression, and the networks saw ratings, profits, and endless commentary to fill the void. This is the forbidden truth. The system thrives on division. By weaponizing this trial, they achieved something devastating, turning the people against each other so they would never unite against the corruption at the top. The victims, Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman, were buried not just in the ground, but in silence. Their names became secondary to the endless obsession with O.J. Simpson's freedom or guilt. Their humanity was sacrificed for spectacle, and in that sacrifice lies the ritual. You must understand, trials like this are not merely about justice, they are about energy. The collective attention, the emotional investment of millions, is harvested. The media isn't reporting, it's feeding. And the trial of O.J. Simpson fed on America's deepest wounds. Look closely, and you see the fingerprints of control systems everywhere. The media chose the angles, the networks decided which moments to replay, which faces to spotlight, which sound bites to burn into your mind. The phrase "trial of the century" wasn't organic, it was branding. A label crafted to lock the event into cultural memory forever. Because if they can control what you remember, they can control how you think. O.J. Simpson walked out of that courtroom a free man, but he was no longer a man. He was a myth, a weaponized story, a permanent scar etched into America's psyche. And here lies the paradox in acquitting him. The jury did not deliver justice, they delivered the system its greatest victory. They proved that law could be theater, that evidence could be twisted, that public perception could be fractured into permanent tribal camps. That verdict wasn't the end of a trial. It was the beginning of a new era, where truth itself could be put on trial and defeated, beneath the lights of the courtroom. Beyond the cameras and the screaming headlines, there were details the public would never fully grasp: small, silent acts that shaped the trial's outcome. The gloves, allegedly left at the crime scene, became the symbol of everything deceptive, everything controlled. "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," the defense cried, a line now immortalized in history. But the deeper truth was never about a glove. It was about perception. The defense orchestrated a theater of doubt, meticulously planting seeds of suspicion, not just in the jury's mind, but in the consciousness of a nation. Every demonstration of race, every insinuation of police misconduct, every carefully timed photograph in the media, all of it worked like clockwork. Here lies the forbidden knowledge. The trial was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The defense understood instinctively that law is not blind. It is human, vulnerable to narrative, to suggestion, to fear. And they exploited it. The prosecution, meanwhile, stumbled in public, fumbling details, revealing biases, displaying a quiet desperation that contrasted with the defense's disciplined precision. The truth became malleable, bending to the pressures of media and manipulation. Outside the courtroom, the streets told a different story. Los Angeles burned not from the trial itself, but from the invisible hand that knew that emotional chaos could be harnessed. Communities raged, families argued, cities fractured, and the power brokers watched, knowing that a nation distracted by spectacle is a nation easy to control. Remember this, the trial was more than O.J. Simpson. It was a lesson in how perception can override evidence, how collective belief can become reality, and how the machinery of influence operates quietly while the masses scream over symbols. Every moment of outrage, every tear, every jubilant cheer, was energy that fueled the system. And in the shadows, the dead watched the victims silenced, their stories stripped of humanity, reduced to mere catalysts for a performance no one was permitted to interrupt. That is the hidden agenda. Crime becomes theater, tragedy becomes distraction, and truth becomes invisible. The world outside the courtroom moved on, but inside, a lesson had been etched into history. Control the narrative, and you controlled the people. And yet, even now, decades later, we feel the ripples, the fractures in trust, the permanent divide sewn into the fabric of society. This is how true crime transcends crime itself. It reveals the systems above, operating silently, shaping thought, manipulating emotion, and keeping forbidden truths hidden in plain sight. The night of June 12, 1994, still burns in memory, a time stamp of horror that split Los Angeles into fragments of disbelief and fury. Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman were found lifeless, the brutality of their deaths shocking in its intimacy, in its cold efficiency. The knives had spoken, leaving marks that no words could erase. Yet the world's attention would soon be stolen by a different kind of weapon, manipulation. The media descended like a storm, relentless and hungry, broadcasting every rumor, every whisper, every half-truth. In that chaos, the line between evidence and entertainment vanished. O.J. Simpson, a man once adored for charisma and fame, became a symbol, a lightning rod for fear, for anger, for longing to witness justice. But the truth, what really happened in those moments, in those homes, remained veiled, obscured by strategy, misdirection, and human fallibility. The detectives who arrived first, walking through bloodied rooms and shattered normalcy, carried a weight that would never lift. Every step they took, every item collected, became part of a hidden narrative that few could read, yet everyone felt its pressure. And then came the calls, the frantic, desperate attempts by law enforcement to reconcile the visible chaos with the invisible forces at play. Behind the scenes, decisions were made that no jury would ever see, choices in evidence handling, choices in procedure, subtle misalignments that would later seed doubt and controversy. This is where the forbidden history lies, not merely in the acts of violence, but in the systems surrounding them, the unseen networks of influence and human error that dictate the course of truth. Every photograph, every fingerprint, every hair found on a glove or a gown was more than evidence. It was a token in a game too vast for any courtroom to contain. And while the public debated innocence and guilt, the real story remained encrypted in layers of institutional behavior, in choices too small to notice, yet too powerful to ignore. The city itself became an accomplice, its divisions, its fear, its biases shaping what would later become an iconic trial. Behind the spectacle, a silent lesson emerges. The machinery of society can be both witness and participant, silently shaping outcomes, quietly bending reality toward those who understand its subtle rules. What you see as justice, as clarity, is often a carefully constructed illusion, a stage upon which hidden forces perform, their influence invisible yet undeniable, their reach extending far beyond the walls of any courtroom. And as the night closed on June 12th, the world had already been set on a path where perception, manipulation, and human frailty would dominate the story forever. The investigation into the murders was not just a pursuit of a killer, it became an excavation of human error, systemic failure, and the fragile veneer of law enforcement. Detectives swarmed the Simpson estate, cataloguing every trace of life, every microscopic hint of chaos, yet every piece of evidence was tainted by circumstance, by the limitations of the human mind. The infamous gloves, the footprints in the blood, the mysterious footprints outside the crime scene all became symbols, not of clarity, but of ambiguity. Every forensic analyst, every lab technician, became both interpreter and storyteller, shaping narratives that would later clash violently in court. And the media, they were the chorus, screaming every suspicion, magnifying every misstep, and twisting every revelation into entertainment, turning a tragedy into a theater of obsession. Each broadcast, each breaking news segment, reinforced not truth but spectacle, creating an environment in which perception could be more powerful than evidence. In this context, even O.J. Simpson's fame became a weapon, a psychological tool, a mask both to hide behind and to manipulate public sentiment. The trial would later reveal that the system itself is porous, that bias seeps through every procedural crack, that influence can twist the meaning of facts before they are even recorded. Lawyers exploited these vulnerabilities ruthlessly, turning ambiguity into leverage, uncertainty into strategy, and the public into unwitting participants in a dangerous theater. The most damning evidence, the blood, was handled with a carelessness that seemed almost intentional, a choreography of error that raised questions about competence, complicity, and hidden agendas. Every step of the investigation was shadowed by this tension between the search for truth and the unavoidable influence of human perception, prejudice, and ambition. And yet, beneath all of this, an even darker pattern emerges, the way in which fear and fascination can blind an entire city, can manipulate millions into accepting narratives without ever knowing the underlying reality. Here lies the forbidden history of the Simpson case, not merely a story of murder, but a story of human systems failing under pressure, of institutions bending under the weight of fame and fear, and of the invisible hands that guide what is seen, what is recorded, and what is remembered. The violence of the act itself, becomes secondary to the violence of perception, manipulation, and institutional fragility. And as you consider the images of that night, the flashing cameras, the blood-stained evidence, remember this: what society sees is never the whole story. The truth is fragmented, hidden, and often forbidden, waiting for those willing to look beyond the spectacle, beyond the headlines, and into the shadowed mechanics of power and perception. As the trial approached, the atmosphere in Los Angeles became electric, charged with a tension that was almost palpable, as if the city itself held its breath, knowing that what would unfold inside the courthouse could fracture its very understanding of justice. The prosecution and defense each prepared for a battle not just over facts, but over the minds and hearts of millions. Every detail of Simpson's life, every relationship, every public persona became ammunition. The courtroom transformed into a theater of extremes, a stage where perception, emotion, and symbolism mattered as much as DNA and fingerprints. The evidence, the gloves, the bloody sock, the car chase, the torn-off cap was dissected not only for its factual content, but for the stories it could tell, the narratives it could construct. And behind the scenes, strategies were being woven with meticulous care. The defense's race card, the prosecution's appeal to logic and certainty. Each move calculated to exploit the fissures in the jury's understanding, in the collective psyche of the nation. But the darker truth, the forbidden layer, is this: the trial was never just about O.J. Simpson. It was about a city grappling with its own history of racial tension, mistrust of authority, and systemic inequities. The evidence, the arguments, even the jury itself became proxies for these deeper conflicts. Each witness brought not only their testimony, but the weight of their perception, shaped by years of social conditioning, personal trauma, and collective memory. And the media, omnipresent and omniscient, amplified every whisper, every accusation, every sigh, turning a legal process into a public spectacle. A grand narrative where the line between truth and performance blurred beyond recognition. For those watching, for those invested in the story, the trial offered a glimpse into a hidden world, the psychology of influence, the manipulation of perception, the power of narrative to define reality. In this court, truth was not absolute. It was contested, debated, and constructed in real time. And as the jury listened, as the nation watched, the forbidden reality remained. Justice is not simply the application of law, but a complex interplay of human psychology, societal pressures, and the unseen currents of power that shape outcomes before a single verdict is uttered. To understand the Simpson trial is to understand not only the case itself, but the mechanisms by which truth is filtered, controlled, and sometimes deliberately obscured. It is a story that demands scrutiny, that requires you to question what you see, what you are told, and what lies just beneath the surface, hidden from plain sight, but shaping every decision, every reaction, every heartbeat in that courtroom of shadows. Inside the courthouse, every detail became a weapon, every gesture a calculated signal. The defense, led by Johnny Cochran, transformed the courtroom into a stage where perception outweighed fact, where emotion became the lens through which every piece of evidence was filtered. The infamous glove, left at Simpson's estate, became the central symbol of doubt and manipulation, too small, too large, soaked in contradiction, and yet the jurors were forced to confront it not as a piece of evidence, but as a puzzle piece in a narrative meticulously orchestrated. Meanwhile, Marcia, Clark, and the prosecution struggled against the tide of spectacle. Aware that they were not merely proving a murder case, they were navigating the hidden currents of race, fame, and media influence that no legal strategy alone could control. Outside, Los Angeles roiled, divided along invisible lines drawn by history and resentment, a city teetering on the edge of collective trauma. The trial illuminated a forbidden truth that most are reluctant to admit. The law is not blind. It is a reflection of power, perception, and narrative mastery. Jurors were bombarded with expert testimony on DNA, blood analysis, and forensic procedure, but they were also swept into a cultural war over trust, authority, and identity. And as they deliberated, millions watched from their homes, their interpretations shaped by commentary, headlines, and the seductive drama of television. Every reaction was magnified, every opinion amplified, and the line between justice and theater blurred. The media did not merely report. It participated, shaping the reality in which the trial existed, turning the courtroom into a crucible where social psychology, racial tension, and celebrity collided. But beneath this visible chaos, a darker layer persisted, one rarely discussed. The trial revealed how deeply human judgment can be manipulated, how perception can outweigh evidence, and how societal pressures silently coerce decisions in ways invisible to those under scrutiny. The Simpson case, at its core, was an experiment in mass psychology, a demonstration of how a society interprets truth when confronted with conflicting narratives, historical grievances, and the intoxicating power of fame. And as the trial progressed, the hidden mechanisms of influence continued to unfold. Every media clip, every lawyer's flourish, every jury note carried unseen weight, shaping an outcome that would forever redefine public understanding of justice. For those willing to peer beyond the surface, it became clear that the case was not merely about guilt or innocence. It was about control, narrative dominance, and the unseen forces that guide human belief. The verdict, when it finally arrived, would not only determine a man's fate, but expose the shadows behind the facade of law and order, the forbidden history that lurks behind every headline, every carefully curated image, every televised moment of moral reckoning. The jury's deliberation was not a simple matter of tallying facts. It was a descent into the murky depths of collective consciousness, where fear, bias, and empathy intersected in unpredictable ways. Each juror brought to the room a lifetime of experiences, prejudices, and unspoken assumptions, and these invisible forces collided under the intense weight of the trial. The blood evidence, once thought conclusive, was reframed, refracted through a lens of doubt sown by defense attorneys with surgical precision. Questions were whispered, glances exchanged, and hidden alliances formed as the jurors navigated the psychological minefield designed for them. Outside, Los Angeles simmered, an anxious city reflecting back the trial's darkest currents: racial tension, celebrity obsession, and a sense that justice might be a commodity to be negotiated rather than an ideal to uphold. Media narratives, edited and sensationalized, crept into the deliberation room like a shadow, leaving marks on the subconscious, shaping the boundaries of what was believable and what was not. The jury grappled not merely with evidence, but with perception itself, how reality is constructed, manipulated, and weaponized in the hands of those who understand the human psyche. In these tense hours, the Simpson trial revealed a deeper, more forbidden truth. The very institutions meant to administer justice are subject to the invisible currents of culture, fear, and influence. Every decision, every hesitation, every question asked inside the deliberation room was a reflection of unseen societal pressures. The public, unaware of these internal dynamics, fixated on the theatrics outside the room, missing the profound psychological experiment unfolding within. And yet, for the jury, the stakes were absolute. They were tasked with rendering a judgment on life and death, love and betrayal, truth and fabrication, while simultaneously navigating the invisible landscape of manipulation orchestrated by lawyers, media, and circumstance. When they finally reached their verdict, it would resonate far beyond the walls of the courtroom, revealing the fragile line between justice and performance, truth and narrative. The case exposed the dark mechanisms by which perception can be molded, how loyalty and fear coexist in the mind, and how human judgment is never purely objective but entangled with history, emotion, and identity. For those who dare to study it, the Simpson trial is not just a story of a murder or a trial. It is a forbidden map of influence, a study in how societies adjudicate truth, and a stark reminder that power often lies not in evidence, but in the unseen control of minds. It leaves us questioning whether justice is ever truly blind, or if it merely dances to the tune of those who know how to orchestrate the music behind the curtain. When the verdict was finally announced, a shudder passed through Los Angeles, a city holding its collective breath for months, yet unprepared for the reverberations that followed. The courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, some in vindication, but beneath the visible chaos lay a darker, more insidious truth. The verdict did not resolve the case, it amplified the hidden fractures in society, exposing every fault line of race, class, and celebrity worship. For many, the acquittal was not just about O.J. Simpson. It was a reflection of a justice system entangled in human bias, procedural mistakes, and the manipulation of narrative. The defense had turned the courtroom into a theater, playing upon fears and assumptions embedded deep within the jurors' consciousness. Every meticulously planted doubt, every insinuation about racial prejudice in law enforcement, became a tool to reshape perception, bending the truth into an alternate reality where certainty was impossible. Outside, the world responded in waves of outrage, celebration, and fear. News networks replayed the trial endlessly, magnifying every gesture, every pause, every expression as if they were hieroglyphs containing secret knowledge about guilt and innocence. Yet the most profound manipulation was subtle, invisible to casual observers: the orchestration of human belief. The trial revealed a forbidden dynamic at the core of all systems of control: the ability to influence perception and, through it, reality itself. It was a case study in psychological warfare, not of armies, but of the mind, where information, misdirection, and emotional resonance carried more weight than facts. Alone, O.J. Simpson's freedom did not signify triumph or justice. It illuminated the fragility of human judgment and the ease with which it could be swayed. Decades later, the case remains a symbol, a dark mirror reflecting how power operates beyond legislation, beyond law, and beyond the superficial morality of society. It reminds us that every courtroom is also a battlefield, every narrative a potential weapon, and every mind a field for unseen influence. And as you watch this, understand that these lessons are not confined to Los Angeles in 1995. They echo in every system of authority, in every institution claiming fairness, and in every society that believes it knows the truth while shadows manipulate the strings behind the scenes. The O.J. Simpson trial was more than a spectacle. It was an initiation into the forbidden knowledge of how truth is constructed, controlled, and contested. It is a warning. The world you see is only the surface, and beneath it lies a labyrinth of power, persuasion, and secret forces shaping the fate of men, the judgment of institutions, and the illusion of justice itself. The aftermath of the trial did not end with Simpson walking free. It began a cascade of hidden consequences, whispers, and unspoken agreements that would haunt Los Angeles for years. Beyond the media spectacle, there were unseen forces at work, the interplay of money, influence, and fear shaping every decision in ways the public could not perceive. Attorneys became conduits of power, manipulating evidence and perception with a precision that resembled a dark science, where law and morality were instruments, not guides. The jurors, human and fallible, were placed at the center of an invisible battlefield, absorbing emotional pressure, social expectation, and subtle manipulations from all sides. Each day, each piece of testimony was not merely information, it was a weapon, a psychological lever designed to fracture certainty and seed doubt. Outside the courtroom, communities interpreted the events through their own lenses, reinforcing their own narratives, proving that truth is not universal but sculpted by belief, bias, and the channels through which it travels. The press became both messenger and manipulator, broadcasting fragments that inflamed tension, stoked fear, and subtly directed attention away from uncomfortable realities. In this theater of shadows, the real crime was not the murder itself, but the orchestration of perception, the hidden choreography behind every argument, objection, and revelation. Every misstep in evidence handling, every overlooked protocol was exploited, revealing how fragile systems of justice can be when confronted with human cunning and strategic deception. And yet, while millions watched, only a few understood the underlying mechanics at work, the power of narrative as a tool of control, the ease with which public opinion can be steered, the subtle ways a skilled operator can bend the world to their will without leaving fingerprints on law books or statutes. The case became a blueprint, consciously or unconsciously studied by those who move unseen within the corridors of influence. It showed how a single event, amplified by media and manipulated by expertise, could redefine truth itself. As the years passed, Simpson's acquittal remained etched in public memory, but for those who understood the layers beneath, the story was far darker, a demonstration of how human systems, designed to protect justice, can be twisted by knowledge, preparation, and the hidden exploitation of human psychology. And as you absorb this, know that the trial was not merely a historical event. It was a window into forbidden understanding, a revelation that the structures around you, which promise fairness, can be quietly, completely, and systematically subverted. The danger lies not only in what you see, but in what remains unseen. And in the shadows of that unseen world, truth is never what it appears to be. Beneath the glare of televised proceedings, there was a network of silent observers, the invisible eyes and ears who understood the power of timing, influence, and secrecy. Lawyers whispered in corridors, exchanging coded signals, aware that a single slip could shatter their carefully constructed narrative. Detectives, constrained by procedure yet aware of public scrutiny, often found themselves paralyzed, forced to act in ways that appeased perception more than pursuing truth. Every forensic report carried a hidden tension. Each DNA match, each inconclusive fingerprint, became a battlefield where interpretation outweighed raw fact. Meanwhile, the social fabric of Los Angeles itself trembled, pulled taut by decades of systemic inequity, racial tension, and economic disparity. Creating a fertile ground for the trial to become more than legal, it became symbolic. Outside the courtroom, the city pulsed with anticipation and dread. Neighbors speculated, media consumed, and families huddled around screens, feeling the collective weight of a story that belonged to no one yet touched everyone. And in this storm, O.J. Simpson himself was both actor and symbol, a man whose fame, fortune, and persona had been weaponized against him and by him, manipulated by unseen hands who understood the alchemy of celebrity, guilt, and public perception. Evidence was not merely evidence. It was a narrative tool, selectively presented, emphasized, or ignored, its true meaning buried beneath layers of performance and rhetoric. Attorneys wielded it like a blade, slicing through logic and emotion with equal efficiency, exploiting human bias in real time. The jurors, untrained yet central to the outcome, became instruments of this hidden orchestration, their deliberations influenced by media echoes, societal pressure, and the unspoken understanding that their verdict would resonate far beyond the walls of the courthouse. And even as the trial concluded, the unseen manipulations persisted. Private discussions, backroom negotiations, and unrecorded promises that shaped the post-trial landscape, determining which alliances would hold and which would collapse. It became clear that the Simpson trial was not merely a case of murder or legal procedure, was a study in human behavior, a demonstration of control and influence, and a reminder that systems designed for justice are often instruments for power. Every decision, every moment of silence, every whispered conversation contributed to a story that could never be fully documented. A story where the truth was fragmented, elusive, and dangerous to know. And now, as you peer into these shadows, understand that you are witnessing more than history. You are witnessing the mechanics of secrecy, manipulation, and forbidden knowledge, a dark lesson hidden in plain sight, waiting for those willing to see beyond the obvious, beyond the televised spectacle, into the raw, unfiltered reality of human ambition and cunning. The verdict arrived not with a whisper, but with a shockwave that reverberated through every corner of America. A judgment that was less about facts and more about the invisible forces shaping perception. When the words "not guilty" echoed in the courtroom, the air itself seemed to pulse with disbelief, triumph, and fear. a chaotic mixture reflecting the fracture lines within society. Streets erupted in celebration, others in silent fury. Yet beneath the visible reactions lay a deeper truth few acknowledged. The trial had revealed the fragility of justice in the presence of power, influence, and public theater. The nation had watched a narrative unfold in real time, a story manipulated not merely by attorneys or witnesses, but by decades of systemic inequities, media sensationalism, and calculated psychological pressure. O.J. Simpson walked free, but the true cost was invisible. Trust in institutions eroded, relationships strained, and a culture forced to confront uncomfortable realities about race, fame, and manipulation. Behind the public spectacle, deals were struck, conversations unrecorded, and strategies enacted that would never be fully revealed. Lawyers debriefed quietly, understanding the lessons learned and the precedents set for both the guilty and the innocent. Detectives catalogued frustrations in private files, knowing that evidence, no matter how meticulously collected, could be undermined by the theater surrounding it. The media, aware of their own influence, dissected every gesture, pause, and tone, perpetuating a narrative that served the story more than the truth. And the jurors, whose deliberations had been a crucible of bias, pressure, and moral calculus, emerged changed, carrying the invisible weight of having decided not just a case, but the public consciousness. Scholars, commentators, and citizens would debate the trial endlessly, but the core reality remained hidden. Power, secrecy, and psychological manipulation had orchestrated an outcome as much as the legal arguments themselves. O.J. Simpson's freedom was the surface, a visible result masking a far more intricate web of control, where every act of voluntary or coerced played a role in an unseen architecture of influence. As the courtroom emptied and cameras dimmed, the lessons of the trial remained, encoded in the minds of those who witnessed, waiting for those who could interpret them beyond the noise of outrage and celebration. And now, as you absorb the full magnitude of this story, remember that what you see, the verdict, the headlines, the chaos, is only the tip of an iceberg. Beneath it lies a dark, complex network of human behavior, hidden agendas, and forbidden truths, lessons about power, manipulation, and the fragility of institutions that most will never understand. You are seeing the hidden machinery of influence, a psychological battlefield disguised as a courtroom, a stark reminder that reality is often stranger, darker, and more controlled than you dare to believe. In the dead of night, Boston lay silent, oblivious to the storm that was about to strike one of its most sacred temples of art. It was March 18th, 1990, and the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, a fortress of history and beauty, was about to be violated in a way that would echo through time. Imagine two men dressed as policemen, stepping across a threshold that should have been inviolable, their faces calm, their intentions lethal in their precision. The guards, unprepared, were subdued in minutes, bound and silenced, as the thieves began their hour-long descent into audacity. This was no ordinary robbery. It was a surgical strike, a calculated act that would strip the museum of 13 priceless works of art, including the concert by Vermeer and Rembrandt's only seascape, The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. Yet the choices of the thieves were perplexing. Almost defiant, some of the most valuable pieces were left untouched, while items of comparatively modest worth were seized. Was this chaos, incompetence, or a deliberate message hidden beneath the surface? As you watch this story unfold, understand this: every motion, every stolen canvas, Every empty frame left hanging in the museum is a clue to a narrative of greed, loyalty, and unseen power. The FBI, taking control immediately, encountered a labyrinth without walls. A crime with no fingerprints strong enough to indict, no witnesses with absolute certainty, no DNA evidence that could tie the culprits definitively to the act. The thieves had moved like shadows, exploiting the weaknesses of a system designed to protect beauty but restrained by rules, tradition, and human error. Guards were paid barely above minimum wage, cameras recorded only the perimeter, alarms were disabled, and a security system existed more in theory than in practical effect. This was not mere happenstance. This was preparation, knowledge, and an intimate understanding of both human psychology and institutional blind spots. What follows is not just a tale of theft, it is a journey into the dark corridors of ambition, the shadows where organized crime intersects with culture, where personal vendettas and hidden alliances dictate action. You are about to descend into a story where time has frozen, where the stolen masterpieces remain hidden, and where the true motives of men long gone may never be revealed. As we peel back each layer, you will see the forbidden history behind the heist, the corruption that thrived in plain sight, and the unnerving reality that some secrets, no matter how meticulously hidden, can shape the destiny of a city, a culture, and the very definition of value itself. The night was quiet, too quiet, a silence that masked the approaching chaos. Outside, revelers of St. Patrick's Day stumbled through the streets, unaware that two men in plain sight, dressed as policemen, were about to commit a crime that would haunt Boston for decades. Inside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, Rick Abath, a 23-year-old guard, and Randy Heston, 25, were following routines that would soon prove tragically insufficient. Patrols were made, alarms were ignored as malfunctions, doors were opened and closed without notice, and yet none of it mattered when deception arrived at their doorstep. At precisely 1:24 a.m., the intruders rang the buzzer and convinced Abath to admit them, citing a disturbance. What the guards did not know, what the city would not comprehend for years, was that these men had rehearsed every step, predicted every weakness, and were executing a plan with surgical precision. Within minutes, both guards were handcuffed, duct-taped, and led to the basement, stripped of their ability to alert the outside world. The thieves spoke calmly, almost conversationally, suggesting that the guards would be rewarded if they cooperated. A psychological manipulation designed to instill compliance and suppress instinctive resistance. What followed was an hour of audacious plunder. In the Dutch room, alarms that should have screamed across the building were smashed. The concert, Vermeer's masterpiece, was ripped from its frame and handled with brute disregard for centuries of artistry. Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee met the same violent fate, a testament to human ambition outweighing respect for history. Smaller works, sketches by Degas, a Chinese Jew, even an imperial eagle, finial, were collected alongside the greatest treasures, a decision that continues to baffle experts. Each stolen item represented not just monetary value, but a key to understanding the psychology of the heist. Why leave untouched works by Raphael, Botticelli, or Michelangelo? Why avoid Titian's Rape of Europa, arguably the museum's crown jewel? The thieves' selection hints at either chaos disguised as method or a deeper agenda. A map of power and influence hidden in plain sight. After 81 minutes, they disappeared, leaving behind empty frames, a violated institution, and a puzzle that would remain unsolved. The museum was left in shock, the guards traumatized, the city stunned. The FBI would later speculate that the perpetrators were connected to organized crime, yet no clear trail of evidence could be found. DNA advancements would come and go, informants would speak and recant, and yet the stolen art would vanish into a shadow world where its fate remains unknown. And the true story of that night lingers like a ghost in every empty frame and every unanswered question. The morning after the theft, the Gardner Museum was a scene of stunned disbelief. The guards remained bound in the basement, the security desk empty, the alarms silenced, and the city unaware that history had been violently rewritten overnight. Investigators arrived to find shattered frames, gouged walls, and the eerie emptiness of space where masterpieces once hung a void that spoke louder than any crime scene could. In the cold light of day, the scale of the theft became horrifyingly clear. 13 works of art, collectively valued at over $500 million, had vanished, and with them, a fragment of cultural memory. The concert, one of only 34 known Vermeer paintings. The Rembrandt seascape The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, and a small self-portrait etching by Rembrandt were gone, along with Degas sketches, a Manet, a Chinese G, and a French imperial eagle finial works, so disparate that investigators struggled to find logic in the selection. It was as if the thieves were sending a message, leaving certain treasures untouched while deliberately targeting others, and the implications were unsettling. Who could orchestrate such a precise operation? Who would risk the ire of the law, the press, and history itself? Early leads immediately pointed toward organized crime. The Boston Mafia, already embroiled in internal war, had both motive and means. Bobby Donati, a gangster whose ambition was matched only by his ruthlessness, was suspected of orchestrating the heist to negotiate freedom for an imprisoned associate. Yet the web of potential culprits expanded rapidly. Associates of the Molino gang, men like Robert Garante and Robert Gentile, were scrutinized. Their ties to the stolen works hinted at a shadowed network where art and crime intersected in dangerous ways. The FBI, lacking strong physical evidence, relied on interrogation, informants, and surveillance, piecing together fragments of truth while navigating a labyrinth of deception. Letters arrived from anonymous sources claiming knowledge of the stolen art, some offering negotiations, others threatening silence. Each tip led deeper into murky waters, revealing a subculture where loyalty, fear, and greed dictated behavior more than law or morality. As the investigation continued, the public watched in disbelief, yet could not grasp the psychological precision behind the crime. The theft was not chaotic. It was calculated, executed with knowledge of human behavior, security weaknesses, and institutional blind spots. In those stolen hours, a crime became legend, a mystery that would haunt law enforcement art historians, and the very notion of cultural preservation. And as the empty frames stared back at every visitor who walked the museum halls, the silent accusation remained: what is lost to ambition may never be recovered, and some truths are buried so deeply that even time cannot unearth them. The night of March 18th, 1990, is etched in the collective memory of Boston as a night when the ordinary was shattered by meticulous darkness. Two men, dressed as police officers, approached the side entrance of the Gardner Museum with an air of authority that immediately commanded trust. Their very appearance was a psychological weapon, exploiting the instinctive obedience humans afford uniformed figures. Security guard Rick Abath, watching from the desk, saw them on the CCTV and perceived legitimacy. The shorter man's fake moustache barely registered as a flaw in the illusion. Within minutes, the guards were subdued, duct-taped, and blindfolded, their panic and confusion rendered irrelevant by the precision of the criminal's preparation. The thieves did not rush. They operated with patience, surveying the museum with the calculating calm of predators. Infrared motion detectors recorded their every step, a silent witness to the methodical desecration of cultural heritage. The Dutch room became a theatre of destruction, glass shattered, canvases sliced from their frames, and centuries of artistic genius reduced to mere cargo for unknown ends. The concert by Vermeer was removed, its fragile canvas rolled and likely damaged. Alongside Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, his only known seascape, a work of unparalleled historical and monetary value. The thieves' choice of targets suggested knowledge, yet defied expertise. They took certain relatively valueless items while leaving untouched works by Raphael, Botticelli, and Michelangelo. The precision was maddeningly selective, hinting at motives beyond mere financial gain, suggesting a knowledge of the museum's collection, its layout, and perhaps a psychological intent to humiliate authority, law enforcement, and society itself. After more than an hour inside, the thieves departed through the side doors, erasing evidence by taking tapes from the security room and ensuring their exit would remain invisible to anyone who might follow. The FBI's investigation quickly expanded into a sprawling web of suspects and theories. Bobby Donati, Miles Connor, and other gang figures became points of interest, each connection revealing more layers of conspiracy, loyalty, and deception. Anonymous letters arrived years later, claiming access to the art and offering conditional return, signaling that the works were not lost but deliberately concealed in a shadowed network beyond the law's reach. Each clue, each tip, each confession or denial drew investigators deeper into a world where crime, culture, and human greed intersected, where the value of art extended beyond wealth into influence, power, and control. The theft was not a random act. It was a carefully choreographed exploitation of institutional weakness and human trust, a testament to the darkness that can dwell behind seemingly civilized facades. As the empty frames still hang in the museum, they stand as silent sentinels of a crime that continues to defy resolution, whispering a warning. Some truths are too dangerous to reveal, some treasures too coveted to survive the hands of men. The investigation into the Gardner heist quickly revealed the limits of conventional law, enforcement in the face of calculated criminal ingenuity. The FBI, taking control because the stolen art could cross state lines, confronted a crime scene almost devoid of physical evidence. Fingerprints and footprints existed, yet none could definitively link to the thieves. DNA testing in later years would prove inconclusive, or in some cases, evidence had simply been lost amid bureaucratic files. This absence of tangible proof forced investigators to navigate a labyrinth of human behavior, motive, and rumor, where every lead was entangled with deception and fear. Security guard Rick, a Bath, became a focal point, scrutinized for his movements that night, the brief opening of the side door, the patrols that left gaps in surveillance, but he maintained his innocence. His actions, perhaps ordinary routine, perhaps unknowingly aiding the perpetrators. Beyond him loomed the specter of organized crime. The notorious Winter Hill Gang, led by Whitey Bulger, whose connections to law enforcement and the IRA suggested the possibility of an inside conduit to uniforms and information. Bulger denied involvement, yet the network of loyalty, secrecy, and intimidation that defined Boston's criminal underworld made any truth elusive. Then there were the letters, the 1994 correspondence from an anonymous party claiming to negotiate the artworks. Return, speaking of non-common law countries and climate-controlled safekeeping. These letters were a chilling confirmation. The art was alive, curated in darkness, controlled by unseen hands, and subject to human greed, not chance. The existence of intermediaries, people willing to hide the truth for years, revealed a psychological layer to the crime, not merely theft, but manipulation of perception, a game of power played over decades. Figures like Brian McDevitt, Robert Gurr, and Robert Gentile threaded through the narrative, their histories of fraud, threats, and criminal alliances providing potential clues that ultimately dissolved into ambiguity. Each revelation only deepened the mystery. Each denial cast new shadows. The FBI's sting operations, arrests, and interrogations brought fragments of the truth to light, yet no painting returned. Even death, for several prime suspects, did not end the uncertainty. Donati, Houghton, Garante, Turner, and Reisfelder were all deceased, taking their secrets with them. The theft became a meditation on control. Who truly possesses power over art, over law, over memory? The empty frames in the Gardner Museum were no longer just placeholders. They were mirrors reflecting society's inability to protect what it values. Silent monuments to a crime designed to outlast the lives of men. Somewhere, hidden from sight, these masterpieces linger in limbo, witnesses to human cunning, greed, and the seductive power of forbidden knowledge. The deeper one investigates, the more the lines between criminal, conspirator, and historian blur, leaving only the uncomfortable truth. Some crimes are engineered to remain unresolved, their secrets suspended in time, whispering across decades. By the mid-1990s, the Gardner case had evolved from a robbery investigation into a study of human obsession, loyalty, and betrayal. Law enforcement realized that recovering the paintings required more than forensic analysis. It demanded understanding the psychology of men who operated beyond conventional morality. Bobby Donati emerges here as a shadowy figure, a man who navigated gang wars with a lethal combination of charm and ruthlessness. Accounts suggest he orchestrated the heist not for wealth alone, but as leverage a tool to free allies from prison, to assert dominance within the patriarchal crime family, to control outcomes in a world where legal systems could not reach him. Donati's premature death in 1991 cut short any potential negotiation and left a void filled with speculation. Yet, it was not only Donati's presence that complicated the story, was the network of enablers and intermediaries. Men like Robert Garante and Robert Gentile, whose loyalty, fear, and personal agendas entangled them in the aftershocks of the heist. Garantay's widow later claimed her husband had possession of some stolen works, transferring them to Gentile for safekeeping when illness loomed, but Gentile denied ever having them. Federal authorities attempted to pressure confessions through indictments and polygraphs. Yet, even under threat, the men remained silent, a testament to the code of the underworld. Loyalty, silence, and self-preservation above all. Then there was David Turner, a figure whose movements before and after the theft suggested complicity, yet whose story was fragmented by alibis, legal entrapment, and calculated obfuscation. The FBI pieced together narratives from informants, intercepted conversations, and circumstantial evidence, yet each revelation only underscored the cleverness of the thieves. This was not a random act, it was a meticulously planned operation, exploiting weaknesses in the museum's security, the guards' routines, and the complacency bred by financial strain. The stolen art itself became a character in this drama. The concert by Vermeer, the storm on the Sea of Galilee by Rembrandt, the Degas sketches, and even the curious inclusion of the GU and eagle finial symbols, perhaps of selective obsession rather than purely monetary value. These objects were alive in absence, shaping narratives, inspiring speculation, and drawing men into dangerous negotiations decades after the crime. The FBI's announcements in 2013 that the thieves were likely deceased revealed a cruel irony. Even death had not solved the puzzle. The painting's existence remained suspended, controlled by unseen forces, a haunting echo of human ambition and secrecy. As you, the viewer, contemplate this mystery, you realize the lesson is not only about theft, it is about power, about knowledge hidden in plain sight, about the fragile boundaries between morality and survival, law and anarchy. Every frame left empty in the Gardner Museum is a reminder that some truths are forbidden, some treasures are eternal in their absence, and some crimes are designed to outlive those who commit them. In the shadowed corners of Boston, the threads of the Gardner heist weave into a tapestry of ambition, fear, and untraceable movements. The thieves, according to informants, were not merely thieves, they were men conditioned by a life where deception, timing, and control were everything. The FBI focused on the Molino gang, a network whose reach extended across New England. Yet even here, certainty was elusive. Evidence was sparse, yet connections suggested that some members knew exactly where the paintings were hidden, if they were hidden at all. Robert Garantay's ties to the stolen works, whether factual or the product of misremembered loyalties, became a central point of intrigue. His widow's confession to federal authorities about transferring paintings to Gentile introduced a tantalizing hypothesis. The art may have been moved, protected, and yet deliberately withheld, like a secret passed down to protect life, reputation, or leverage. Gentile, tested by polygraphs and interrogations, maintained a careful denial that, if true, masked a deeper layer of knowledge and risk. Turner, another Molino associate, became a ghost in the investigation. His alibi layered with uncertainty, his connections suggesting involvement but leaving no tangible proof. George Reisfelder, long deceased, emerged posthumously as a potential participant, his personal effects hinting at an intimacy with the stolen works that official records could never confirm. And then there was the human element that no investigation could quantify, the unspoken code of the criminal underworld. Men who knew, men who saw, men who could act but did not form a collective silence stronger than any vault. even when the FBI orchestrated sting operations, bringing members of the Merlino network face to face with the possibility of recovering the paintings. Results were meager. Information was fragmented, conflicting, and often intentionally misleading. The anonymous 1994 letter to the museum, proposing a negotiation from a non-common law country, reinforced the sense that the paintings existed in a world parallel to law, untouched by legal constraints, yet intimately controlled by human fear, loyalty, and greed. It suggested a climate-controlled storage, precise and hidden, far from prying eyes, and hinted at the idea that knowledge alone had become currency. Each investigative breakthrough, each statement, each potential lead revealed not clarity, but deeper complexity. The Gardner Museum theft had become less a crime scene and more a psychological labyrinth. To understand it is to understand the motives of men who live in secrecy, who manipulate trust, and who can vanish without a trace, leaving masterpieces suspended in a space between existence and legend. The paintings, each worth millions, remained symbols of human desire and control, evidence that some treasures are not defined by ownership, but by the power to withhold them indefinitely. This is not merely history, it is a study of human behavior under extreme conditions, a forbidden narrative that teaches more about the nature of secrecy than any courtroom ever could. The night of March 18, 1990, remains etched into history as more than a theft. It was a masterclass in audacity, timing, and psychological dominance. Two men, dressed as police officers, bypassed the only safeguard that could have alerted authorities, the panic button hidden at the security desk. In that moment, control shifted from the institution to the intruders. The guards, unarmed and outmatched, were bound and rendered silent within minutes, their helplessness amplifying the thieves' calculated authority. It was not just about taking art. It was about demonstrating that rules, surveillance, and law could be circumvented with precise knowledge, audacity, and cold planning. The movement of the thieves, recorded only by infrared detectors, painted a chilling portrait of methodology. Each step was deliberate, each action premeditated, as if the museum itself were a stage for a carefully choreographed ritual of dominance. The destruction of protective glass and the crude cutting of canvases underscored a brutal pragmatism. These men were unconcerned with preservation, concerned only with possession. Yet even in chaos, there was selection. They ignored priceless works by Raphael, Botticelli, and Titian, instead choosing pieces that, while valuable, seemed to fit an internal logic known only to them. The theory that they were amateurs commissioned for a specific task began to crumble as patterns suggested deeper awareness of the museum's weaknesses. Empty frames now hang as monuments to both loss and hope, silent witnesses to a crime that thrives on absence. An absence, in human psychology, is far more haunting than presence. Behind closed doors, the thieves' decisions created a tension between visibility and invisibility, permanence and impermanence. Each stolen painting became a cipher, an encrypted message hidden in plain sight. The FBI's pursuit was relentless, but constrained by the very nature of the crime, a blend of criminal skill and institutional vulnerability. Informants, polygraphs, undercover operations all sought to pierce the veil, but each lead only deepened the mystery. The psychological architecture of the theft reveals a deeper truth. Some crimes are not solved by evidence alone, but by understanding human networks of loyalty, fear, and ambition. The Merlino gang, Donati, Horton, Turner, and Gentile Leach, a node in a network of unspoken agreements and survival strategies, embody the reality that knowledge itself can be a weapon. The stolen masterpieces, meanwhile, occupy a liminal space, existing yet unreachable, their value magnified by secrecy. They are ghosts of ambition, reminders that what is most desired is rarely most attainable. And as the years have passed, the case has transformed from a crime investigation into a study of human nature under extreme conditions: greed, loyalty, cunning, and the haunting power of what is withheld. This is the forbidden history of the Gardner heist, not merely the loss of art, but the revelation that even in plain sight, truth can be manipulated, controlled, and eternally suspended. As dawn broke over Boston on March 18, 1990, the city remained oblivious to the audacious violation that had just taken place. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, a sanctuary of centuries-old art and human achievement, had been rendered a hollow shell. The guards, still bound in the basement, were the first tragic witnesses to the immediate aftermath, a tableau of helplessness and shock. Beyond the physical theft, there was a deeper, almost ritualistic disruption, the removal of masterpieces that were never meant to leave their frames. The concert by Vermeer, The Storm on the Sea of Galilee by Rembrandt, and Manet's Chez Tortoni were gone, but their absence echoed louder than their presence ever had. In the psychological calculus of the thieves, the heist was more than a transaction. It was a statement that even the most carefully curated institutions are vulnerable when human error, systemic complacency, and audacious criminal planning converge. Investigators quickly realized that this was not a simple burglary. The knowledge required to navigate the museum's layout, the timing of patrols, the precise disabling of alarms, all pointed to orchestrated planning and insider-level understanding. Each piece of stolen art represented not only a monetary value, estimates would eventually soar to $500 million, but also a symbolic conquest, a demonstration that power can be seized in silence and shadows. The FBI, confronted with a lack of definitive physical evidence, began tracing networks of organized crime, suspecting connections that spanned the Boston underworld. Names like Bobby Donati, David Houghton, Carmelo Molino, Robert Garenti, and Robert Gentile emerged from a tangled web of alliances, betrayals, and whispered secrets. Each figure held a fragment of the truth, yet each remained cloaked in deniability, exploiting gaps in law, psychology, and human greed. Letters arrived in the following years, anonymous, cryptic, claiming to negotiate the return of the art, further complicating the narrative. These communications, promising wealth, immunity, or even moral justification, underscored a chilling reality. The heist had created its own ecosystem of fear, loyalty, and self-preservation, and still the art remained absent, as though it existed in a parallel plane where time and law could not reach it. Empty frames in the museum's galleries became portals to imagination and dread, constant reminders that the most valuable things can be stolen not only from space but from memory, history, and collective consciousness. Each investigation, each interview, each lead reinforced a disturbing conclusion. The Gardner heist was not a crime of opportunity, but a study in human control over fear, over loyalty, over institutions, and ultimately over the fragile notion that justice can ever fully reclaim what was lost. The heist was not merely a theft. It was an enduring psychological scar on a city, a museum, and a collective understanding of order. By the time the museum reopened after the initial shock, investigators were confronting a haunting puzzle. How could 13 of the most famous works of art vanish without leaving a trace? The answer, they realized, was not just skill, it was patience. Patience that exploited human weakness, institutional blind spots, and the predictable rhythms of everyday life. Security footage was minimal, the cameras only outside, the infrared detectors partially relied upon and icily bypassed. The guards, young and inexperienced, had unknowingly played their roles in a meticulously choreographed drama. Rick Abbot's brief opening of the side door, once scrutinized under the cold light of suspicion, became a symbol of the subtle vulnerabilities that criminals can exploit. Each step of the thieves had been precise, subduing guards, avoiding the panic button, systematically removing sensors, and handling artwork with a methodical, almost clinical approach that suggested experience without artistry. Yet their choices of targets puzzled even seasoned investigators. They ignored certain masterpieces, leaving untouched works by Raphael, Botticelli, and Michelangelo, while taking pieces of comparatively lesser value, like the small Chinese GU and the French Imperial Eagle Finial. Experts posited that this selection reflected a combination of opportunism, ignorance, and personal obsession, an enigma that hinted at a criminal psychology, comfortable with risk, but guided by subjective desire rather than pure monetary logic. In the aftermath, the FBI began piecing together a network of suspects stretching through Boston's criminal underworld, focusing on Dorchester gangs, the Patriarca crime family, and figures like Bobby Donati and David Houghton. Each name carried shadows of betrayal, prior violence, and alliances forged in fear. Letters arrived in the years following the theft. Anonymous communications offering the promise of negotiation, tantalizing glimpses of the stolen masterpieces, and veiled threats that revealed how tightly the stolen works had become entangled with human ego, debt, and mortality. The letters' insistence on offshore accounts, immunity, and timed exchanges spoke to a sophisticated understanding of both art and law, a game where morality was irrelevant and secrecy paramount. Meanwhile, the public became both witness and participant, drawn into speculation, conspiracy theories, and the haunting possibility that the most valuable art in the world had vanished into an invisible, untouchable realm. The Gardner heist, in its audacity, left an indelible mark not just on the museum but on the psychology of theft itself, exposing the fragile intersection of human error, institutional complacency, and criminal ingenuity. It was a heist that transcended the physical, entering the domain of legend, where empty frames became mirrors reflecting fear, obsession, and the forbidden lure of knowledge that no one was meant to possess. As investigators delved deeper, the shadows of Boston's underworld began to take shape with chilling clarity. The names that surface, Bobby Donati, David Houghton, Robert Garante, Robert Gentile, David Turner, were not random criminals. They were men bound by loyalty, fear, and the ruthless hierarchy of organized crime. Each operated in a world where betrayal could be punished with death, and secrets were currency more valuable than gold. Donati, in particular, emerged as a figure shrouded in paradox, charismatic, calculating, and allegedly motivated not by profit but by a twisted sense of duty. Reports suggested he orchestrated the robbery as leverage to negotiate the release of a fellow gangster. Ferrara, from prison, a plan that would require absolute discretion, impeccable timing, and men willing to follow orders into the unknown. The mechanics of the heist itself hinted at a criminal mind comfortable with both planning and improvisation. Infrared motion detectors were bypassed, fire alarms triggered and silenced, cameras ignored or erased, and guards subdued with minimal resistance. Yet the thieves' approach was neither reckless nor random. It was surgical, targeting specific rooms, selecting particular works, leaving others untouched. The FBI's attempts to trace the artwork through known associates led them into a labyrinth of deceit. Garante allegedly held some paintings briefly, then passed them to Gentile for safekeeping, though Gentile consistently denied knowledge. Turner's alleged involvement added another layer of complexity: his alibi. Trips to Florida and associations with other gang members suggested either brilliance or desperation in concealing his role. Amid these murky waters, anonymous letters to the museum hinted at the paintings' existence in non-common law countries under climate-controlled conditions, as if the thieves wanted to remind the world that the stolen art was alive, yet untouchable. Every clue was a double-edged sword, tantalizing yet elusive, promising revelation while deepening the mystery. The public, captivated by the audacity, began imagining the paintings hidden in basements, attics, or secret vaults across continents, while the FBI remained ensnared in a battle of intelligence, criminal psychology, and time. By 2013, the agency claimed high confidence in identifying the thieves, yet the artwork remained missing. What emerges from this tangled narrative is a study not merely of theft, but of human obsession, institutional vulnerability, and the intoxicating allure of forbidden knowledge. The empty frames hanging silently in the Gardner Museum are more than placeholders. They are reminders of a crime that defies closure, a dark history that whispers of greed, loyalty, and secrets too dangerous to reveal. They are proof that some truths, once exposed, can change our understanding of safety, value, and the very nature of human ambition. The web of suspicion extended beyond the obvious players, reaching into corridors of influence, fear, and intimidation that few dared traverse. Whitey Bulger, Boston's most notorious crime boss, loomed as a phantom presence, his grip on the city's underworld casting shadows over every lead. By 2010, the Gardner case had evolved into a legend of criminal audacity and systemic failure, its shadow stretching far beyond Boston's streets. Investigators realized that each lead was a psychological maze designed to frustrate the curious, misdirect the desperate, and protect the guilty. Robert Gentile's refusal to disclose information, despite facing imprisonment and coercion, revealed the power of silence as a weapon. Here was a man who may have held priceless masterpieces in his possession, yet chose secrecy over freedom, wealth, or redemption. David Turner's complicated network of acquaintances, including Merlino Rossetti, suggested a broader organizational strategy: divide responsibility, obscure paths, and embed layers of uncertainty. The more law enforcement probed, the more the criminals seemed to anticipate, as though the very act of pursuit had been foreseen and neutralized. Bobby Donati's alleged orchestration of the heist added another layer of human intrigue, a man willing to risk everything, including his life, to manipulate events from the shadows. Interviews and confessions collected by investigative reporters, like Stephen Kirkjian, painted a portrait of a criminal ecosystem in which loyalty, intimidation, and fear dictated actions more than profit. Donati's promise to protect Ferrara in the gang war, his alleged distribution of artwork to trusted allies, and his untimely murder created a narrative where the stolen masterpieces were simultaneously currency, leverage, and burden. Then came the tantalizing hints offered by William Youngworth, the antiques dealer who claimed access to the works. His attempts to negotiate the painting's return revealed the intersection of criminal bravado, greed, and psychological gamesmanship. Every photograph, vial of paint chips, and whispered story became a puzzle piece that both revealed and obscured the truth. What remained undeniable, however, was the human fascination with possession, secrecy, and forbidden knowledge. The stolen art, particularly Vermeer's The Concert and Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, represented more than monetary value. They were symbols of mastery, culture, and vulnerability, now ensnared in a web of human ambition and fear. Even the museum's choice to leave empty frames hanging became a testament to absence as memory, to loss as psychological pressure on the public conscience. These frames hung as silent witnesses to the criminal brilliance and moral ambiguity that orchestrated their disappearance. In a broader sense, the Gardner theft became a mirror reflecting society's obsession with control, prestige, and forbidden desire, where the boundaries between right and wrong, legality and loyalty, blurred into a shadowy world most would never glimpse, and fewer would survive to understand. The case, unsolved and unresolved, remains a monument to the dark calculus of human ambition and the fragile nature of trust, where a single act of audacity can ripple through decades, reshaping perception and haunting the collective imagination. The final truth of the Gardner theft may never be fully revealed, yet its echoes continue to reverberate through the corridors of power, crime, and human obsession. The FBI maintains that both thieves are likely deceased, their identities cloaked in layers of deception, their motives partially illuminated by the fragments of testimony from associates like Gentile, Turner, and Garente. Every recovered clue from fingerprints that led nowhere, 2 vials of 17th century paint chips, 2 empty storage ditches, reveals more about human psychology than the fate of the stolen masterpieces. What emerges is a portrait of calculated risk, of loyalty tested against fear, of ambition tempered by mortality. The museum's empty frames remain haunting symbols, placeholders not only for the missing art, but for the unresolved moral questions left behind by those who orchestrated the heist. Isabella Stewart Gardner herself, a collector obsessed with permanence and control, might have understood the irony. Her carefully curated sanctuary now exposed as a stage for deception, manipulation, and human frailty. Beyond the theft itself lies a darker narrative, a story about society's fascination with value, secrecy, and power. Art was taken, yes, but what was also stolen was certainty, trust, and the illusion that history can remain untarnished. When we peer into the shadows of the Gardner case, we are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, the capacity for audacity, the seduction of secrecy, and the devastating consequences of ambition untempered by conscience. Each name, Donati, Turner, Gentile, Merlino, becomes more than a suspect. They are symbols of a hidden network, a criminal ecosystem operating in plain sight, exploiting systemic weaknesses and human error alike. The very institutions designed to protect, to preserve, to enforce law enforcement. The museum's board, even the societal expectation of morality are revealed as fallible, vulnerable to manipulation by those who understand their weaknesses. And yet, the story does not end in despair. The $10 million reward, the continuous investigations, the public fascination, all sustain a tension between hope and futility. Somewhere, hidden from view, the stolen works may endure old, damaged, yet alive in a shadow world where only the boldest can access them. The Gardner theft is not merely a crime. It is an enduring psychological experiment, a mirror held up to the darkest corners of human ambition, a cautionary tale of how desire, fear, and secrecy intersect to create legends that refuse to fade. As we step back from the crime, we see its ultimate lesson, that knowledge is power. Secrecy is currency, and every action, no matter how calculated, is a thread in a tapestry of consequences that stretches far beyond the immediate into history itself.